From Authentica. I'm Dr. Andy Kaufman, and I'm very pleased to have back two special guests that I know you all love because you watched their previous video many, many times. And I'm speaking of Dave Parker and Dawn Lester, and I want to just show you again their book, excellent, well-researched book that I know a lot of you may already be reading, What Really Makes You Ill. And we are going to have our second chapter in our series to have discussions about some of the topics in this book. And today we're going to talk about non-communicable diseases. So we're going to get out of the infectious disease realm and go into some more common ailments. And so good morning, Dawn and David.
Good morning, and thank you for having us back, Andy. Look forward to this.
And actually, I know it's the afternoon where you are. We're far apart from each other. But what will you tell the audience what exactly you mean by non-communicable diseases?
Okay, well, if we go with what the sort of medical establishment say, in short terms, really, is anything that's non-infectious, so non-communicable, non-infectious, so basically anything that doesn't involve a germ of some sort, be it bacterial or viral. That's broad brush what they mean by it. They have their own ideas as to what actually is responsible for these diseases, and we'll run through a little list of them because we do describe them obviously in detail, many of them in our book, which we'll probably mention quite a few times. But the medical establishment, I'm just looking for their what they believe are the main four factors. Right, so the medical establishment tend to think that they put down four factors, which is tobacco use, physical inactivity, harmful use of alcohol, and an unhealthy diet. Those are basically the four factors that they believe come to these NCDs, as they call non-communicable diseases. We obviously have a very different idea. Our research shows, again, yes, four factors, but very different ones, which we discuss in the book, which are the four factors that we would find is poor nutrition, toxic exposures to many chemicals, which we'll talk about, EMFs, which is electromagnetic frequencies, and excessive and prolonged stress. And the factor that they work through those four things is the release of excessive, I forgot the word has just slipped my mind.
Free radicals.
Is it free radicals?
Yeah, free radicals, yeah.
That's the word, free radicals. And obviously we talk about them in details to show just how the build-up of free radicals, which, as we explain in the book, free radicals are released in the body through its normal functions every day.
Absolutely. David, if I might interrupt for a minute, because I wanted to spend some time on free radicals, and it's something like I've talked about a little bit because people ask me about hydrogen peroxide pretty often. But I noticed that with the establishment list of causes, and your list had one thing in common related to nutrition. And I found that quite interesting that nutrition is mentioned, but yet for physicians, when they're during their training, we get almost no training at all on nutrition. And then we have, nutritionists that work and dietitians that work in hospitals and such, but they seem to be highly influenced by organizations like the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, right? And those organizations are mostly funded by the pharmaceutical industry, right, and other healthcare related industries. So what is distinct about your view of the nutritional causes versus the establishment's view?
Well, I mean, you hit on a very important point there about how associations like the Diabetes Association, which is supposed to give people good advice for their disease, or actually get their funding from the very people that are in some ways responsible for the problems that are caused. So, conflict of interests, absolutely. So when we talk about nutrition, we're talking about food that contains antioxidants. So this is really all your coloured fruit and veg, really. Well, as a nice rule of thumb, if it's got lots of different colours, then you're getting lots of antioxidants. And these are the things that will mop up free radicals. Obviously, the body also releases melatonin when you're sleeping, nighttime, and it's quite important during hours of darkness. And melatonin is released, or one of the things that's released, and that also mops up antioxidants. So, when you've got a healthy body that's taking in good nutrition, and you get regular sleep during hours of darkness, we may come on to why that's important a little later, the body can cope with the free radicals, and they're mopped up, if you like, and expelled from the body in a normal way. But if you're getting poor nutrition, then you're not getting those antioxidants to mop up the free radicals. And if you're not getting good sleep during hours of darkness, so the body can't release things like melatonin, again, to mop up them, then you get a build-up of free radicals. And free radicals in the body are quite destructive. If they're not got rid of, they will have damaged down at cellular level. They'll damage tissues. And this, of course, longer term can lead to all sorts of bodily problems, not least of which is cancer, which is a long-term tissue damage, really. So it's extremely important, and it's really surprising that doctors are not taught much more about nutrition in their training. Maybe there's a good reason for this, coming back to how they're trained, and who it is that's training them, i.e. the pharmaceutical companies mostly, who obviously want to sell their drugs. They don't want to make it as easy as, have a good diet of nutritional fruit and veg and you'll be fine. They don't want to tell you that. There's no money in it for them. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, because people think, oh, great, okay, down the supermarket I can get all my fruit and veg down there, and therefore I'm going to be okay. But it does go a little bit deeper, and it's a little bit more complex than that, because the way fruit and veg is grown now are not necessarily grown in a healthy environment. So the uptake of the fruit and veg when they're growing doesn't necessarily mean that they've taken up from the soil the nutrients to then be able to impart them to you when you eat them. So it becomes a bit more complex. You can get fruit and veg in your supermarket that looks great, but its nutritional value might not be as good as it should be. And then, of course, if you're cooking it, you lose more nutritional value. So the overall nutritional intake can be lower than it ought to be. So so we do recommend, wherever possible, to try and get organically grown fruit and veg, because it's less likely to have been contaminated with pesticides or grown in soils that are depleted in nutrients, particularly magnesium, which is, although people don't need a lot of magnesium in the diet, but you do need some. And that's seems to be one of the first things that suffers in soils that are not looked after properly, and that they've relied on heavy use of fertilizers to grow the produce. This is the farmers, and these fertilizers kill the soil. Really, the soil is not healthy, and so you're not getting the nutrients when the things are growing. So you can be sort of lulled into a false sense of security, where you think, oh, well, I'm getting the fruit and veg, but you're not able to really get the full nutritional value.
Yeah. So, David, this is something I've definitely talked about, how the modern agricultural practices have really depleted the soil, and the overuse of glyphosate destroys the microbes in the soil. So it really is kind of a barren food supply in a sense. And, I certainly have emphasized the need for trace minerals. But also some macro minerals like magnesium are definitely deficient in people with a poor diet. I wanted to.
That's all part of what they call the Green Revolution. The whole point is to put fertilizers and using chemicals to fertilize the soil, but they may have one or two chemicals and minerals that are needed, but they don't necessarily have the full complement. So it's NPK, so it's sort of nitrogen, potassium and phosphorus, and that doesn't include magnesium. And plants need food, need magnesium to be able to make the food so we can eat it, so we get magnesium we need. So definitely not the full complement of nutrients in the soil. So the answer is really to well, we found that the answer is to remineralize the soil, and then the plants have got everything they need, that they then turn it into the kind of minerals that we can absorb from the food and use in the body. So
because there is a great temptation, of course, that people do, is think, well, okay, I realize I may not be getting the nutrients from the natural food that I'm eating, so they go for supplements. Now, people need to be very careful about supplements, because many of the commercially available supplements are not easily absorbed by the body, so they just don't do anything, so you're actually wasting your money. So it's not just as easy as going down your local health shop and buying a packet of multivitamins or something. It's you've got to be careful about how you do it. If you find that you really do need to supplement your diet, you need to be very careful about what you get. I mean, we don't particularly recommend supplements. We recommend natural, healthy food.
Well, we certainly have this in common. And, a lot of times when I have clients that are telling me about their health issues, many times they're on 10 or 15 supplements. And it kind of reminds me how I've seen, patients in medical practice on 10 or 15 medications. And, in addition to many of the preparations not being in the right formulation, they also add binders and excipients and capsule materials. And, those things are just for the ease of manufacture. They don't add anything to the nutritional value, and they actually, if you take enough of them, they can cause problems unto themselves. So I'll give you an example of, if you're going to get a mineral supplement, if you have a mineral that is with a conjugated to a chelated amino acid like glycinate, for example, magnesium glycinate, which is based on the amino acid glycine, that's going to be a more bioavailable form. But like you, I also recommend getting it from natural sources. That's always the best way. And so, for example, if you want to get a magnesium supplement, you could take molasses. Blackstrap molasses, if it's unsulfured and has less than or equal to 50 calories per serving. You take 1 tablespoon in a glass of water daily, and you're getting a nice balance of macrominerals to supplement, and without the need to take any pills or tablets. Yeah. But I also noticed that actually, in terms of nutritional deficiencies, not just related to antioxidants, but people are deficient in cholesterol and collagen. And I see this like almost on a daily basis when I work with clients. So have you guys looked into that at all?
Well, the cholesterol is the whole thing about cholesterol and statins, I think it is. That's a big subject on its own. I mean, there's a load of nonsense, shall we say, that's put out by the medical establishment. Sorry to keep bashing them like this, but unfortunately they're the culprits. There's lots of false information put out about cholesterol, that people have going to have too much cholesterol and cholesterol's bad and all the rest of it. Well, cholesterol, as you know, is essential for the body. It generates it, it makes it. So, some of these things that are sort of trying to prevent the making of cholesterol, the body then kicks in and tries to make more. So you've got this battle then going on where the body knows it needs cholesterol. The real problem is oxidized cholesterol, which is the problem. So cholesterol is a natural thing for the body and is required. So
particularly for the brain,
yeah.
And it makes you wonder why they're trying to lower everyone's cholesterol when it's essential for the brain. Only one of the organs, but I mean, it's not good to have too low a cholesterol. I mean, it's actually really low levels are actually quite.
Yeah.
You probably know more about how dangerous.
Yeah. Well, there's a large study done, I think, by the World Health Organization that showed that people with higher cholesterols actually live longer. And you're absolutely right about the brain. I mean, I think it's like 90% of the dry weight of the brain is cholesterol. Every membrane of every cell in our body is made of cholesterol, and many hormones are synthesized from cholesterol, including vitamin D. I actually think one of the main reasons for pervasive vitamin D deficiency is this cholesterol lowering strategy. And, through Freedom of Information Act disclosures, we have seen that there was collusion between government agencies and the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry to deceive the public, naming cholesterol as a villain. And then what they did is they increased the sugar content in manufactured foods, which increased prescriptions for diabetes drugs. And this was a kind of a big, huge business opportunity. And in my training, this was still the foremost model that was taught to us. And, it's completely wrong. But to bring it full circle back to the free radicals, and by the way, what a free radical is it's a unpaired electron that sets off a chain reaction of chemical reactions that is very destructive, and it can actually involve macromolecules like our proteins and lipids. And so one of the victims of that is the cholesterol that is circulating around our blood, which has many different functions, including signaling. And the cholesterol gets oxidized by these free radical chains, right? When we have too much oxidative stress, which can occur from like high carbohydrate diets, then our own metabolism produces them. Or if we eat a lot of processed food that has various types of chemicals that can induce free radicals, and we're deficient in nature's antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E and other phytochemicals, as you mentioned. So can you talk a little bit more about the oxidation of cholesterol and how that is important in disease?
Did you want
Oh, well, the point, as you said, the body actually needs cholesterol, and it's, I think, something like 85% is made by the liver anyway. So any deficiencies the liver will make up. But the studies that began began the whole idea that cholesterol was bad, and in fact, actually, it's LDL that's supposed to be bad, and HDL, and I can't remember exactly what they stand for, and I'm sure you.
Yeah, it's a high density lipoprotein and low density lipoprotein.
Yes, and the LDL is supposed to be the bad one, and the HDL is supposed to be the good one. But according to Dr. Russell Blaylock, it's the only reason that LDL is supposed to be bad is because it's more easily oxidized. But oxidation of any part of the body, obviously, the free radicals, they can cause damage. So because, as you say, with the cell membrane being made of cholesterol, anything that will attack that cholesterol will attack the cell and start causing damage, and then the cell doesn't work, cells don't function properly, and at that level, that's when you start having the damage, and that can, either in the organs or tissues everywhere, can start to be problematic. And that's the kind of basis of all illness. I mean, I know people call them different diseases, but they're just illness in different parts of the body. And because cholesterol is just everywhere, it certainly is a major factor. But going back to what the WHO thinks an unhealthy diet is, their focus is really on salt and sugar. They suggest that you lower the amount of salt and lower the amount of sugar, rather than actually talking about proper nutrition. So their idea of an unhealthy diet is just about those particular levels. But then again, there's a confusion about what sugar is, because they're all kind of put into the same body or the same heading, and everything isn't the same. All sugars aren't the same. I mean, you get fruit sugars. Natural fruit sugars are completely different from the manufactured sucrose, which is, as some people say, empty calories. And again, calories lead you to down another rabbit hole, because you do need energy, but to classify a healthy diet as one that provides a certain amount of calories alone is looking at the wrong part of healthy diet, the wrong part of what nutrition really is, because it's all the other vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, all of that the body needs for its, to actually function properly.
Right. Well, this sugar thing is really important because, and I think a lot of it has to do with how it's manufactured. Because when you eat a piece of fruit, right, and you have, fructose is the main sugar in there, right? And we know from high fructose corn syrup that that's not a healthy sugar. But here's the reason: it's not the fructose itself; it's the fact that in the fruit there's sugar in a matrix of fiber and other minerals and phytochemicals. So when you put that in your body breaks it down slowly, and the sugar, it has to be sort of removed from this fiber matrix, and fiber is really hard to digest, and some of it's undigestible except maybe by the bacteria in our gut. And so it causes a natural slow release of the sugar into your blood. Whereas when you have refined sugars that have been purified out, and this even occurs if you make fruit juice at home, like, fruit juice basically liberates the sugar from the fiber and makes it like a refined product. But normally what they do is they'll just take the sugar out of there, right, like from sugar beets or sugar cane or from corn in the form of high fructose corn syrup, and then just add that pure sugar. And when you eat that, it gets taken up all at once at a big spike, and it causes a lot of problems. So it overwhelms our metabolic system, and that is what causes a lot of free radicals, or it's also known as oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species, right? And then it also affects our endocrine regulation of sugar metabolism because, our pancreas would secrete insulin when sugar enters our blood in order that the sugar is taken up by cells so that it could be utilized to make energy. But when it's so sudden and so steep a rise, then it overshoots and a little bit too much insulin comes out, and then your sugar goes a little bit too low, and that's when you get like a little bit irritated and hungry, right? They call it hangry, and you might not behave very well when you're in that state, and then you're hungry again, and then what do? You go and eat more sugar, and this vicious cycle kind of continues, and it has behavioral effects, and it has metabolic and physiologic effects for causing disease.
Yeah, but when you eat, sorry.
I was just thinking that this is one of the examples that shows just how important it is to have food, natural food, because nature packages it perfectly well. So if you're eating natural food, healthy food, that's the best way to take these things in. As soon as you get interventionism through manufacturing things or through medical intervention, that's when it upsets the whole balance of the body. It's one of those old stories, where nature knows best. If you eat the fact that food in the way that nature's packaged it, it's well balanced, it's easily assimilated by the body, and everything is fine.
And as you say, the slow release part of the sugars that you're taking in is completely different. And as you say, it's not so much the sugar content, it's the fact that there are all the other factors within a food, that they all work, they all function together. It is packaged there, and there are probably lots of other elements within foods that nobody's even looked at or they don't understand it, and that's why concentrating on lowering sugar and keeping it in a kind of very general sugar content it's not enough, but then that's the point, that they don't really want to upset the food people and the sugar people and the sugar industries.
Yeah, these are very rich industries, and they have a lot of pulling power with sort of governments, particular ministers and that in this country, and sort of congressmen in the US who are easily swayed by big money. And that's what happens. They've got a stranglehold on all of these things, and the information doesn't get out to the public as to what is truly a healthy diet, because there's too many vested interests. But that's just a sad factor, which we're trying to rectify by getting some information out there so that people can make informed decisions.
Yeah, because diabetes is certainly a disease that's increasing. More and more people are being diagnosed with it, and children, of course, which is not too surprising considering the diets. But I'm sure you probably know more about the statistics for that. Yeah,
because the medical establishment we've got sort of type 1 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes. And I think, if I remember correctly, they attribute type 2 diabetes more to be a dietary problem, and type 1 is when your body's just not making insulin anymore, in sufficient quantities, or if at all. But all of these diseases, to sort of come back on track where we thought we might like to go with this, these sort of so-called non-infectious diseases, from what our research, apart from the nutritional side of things, which is extremely important, we've found that the body gets knocked out of kilter, if you like, mainly by the sort of assault of chemicals in various forms that the body is subjected to on a daily basis. And these sort of, I think we put a list together where just some of these chemicals come from, which people might not consider, because some of them are a bit surprising. I mean, probably people are quite happy to understand that there's all sorts of things that appear in their water. I know you've certainly talked about this, water from the tap is not good stuff. And it's got all sorts of additives that the water suppliers put in there, which can be fluoride, or chlorine. And we even get ammonia put in our water over here now, which is, you just think,
wow,
crazy people. So we get 3 lots of stuff. You think,
I guess it's easier to clean glass with the water then, if there's ammonia in it.
Well,
yes,
we certainly make sure we take all that out here, but you just think, who are making these decisions to think that it's a good idea to have ammonia as well as chlorine in your water, But so, and of course the filtration systems in your water supplies are not as good as they should be. This is at the mains water supply, so you're getting all sorts of effluent from pharmaceutical companies and industrial places. So there's all sorts of stuff in your water. So that's one place, the air we breathe, through industrial pollutants in the air, even geoengineering. I know that's a subject on its own with chemtrails and things, but, the air gets polluted. So there's all sorts of chemicals there that people are subjected to. Agriculture, we talked a little bit about it earlier, the ground that stuff's grown in, there's pesticides and herbicides, fertilizers, so the soils are not healthy. Also with crop spraying, you get a lot of drift so even though may not be exactly living on the fields, as it were, the crop spray, when they're spraying, with their fertilizers, that you get a lot of drift. It can go a long way. So again, you're inhaling this stuff, and it's contaminating your food, your body, your own ground, and you may be growing your own fruit and veg that's then being contaminated by the farmer a mile or so down the road who's spraying his chemicals. Cosmetics and personal care products, lots of things in those, parabens, phthalates. These are both endocrine disruptors, and we can talk about the endocrine system maybe a little later. And clothes. Now, people may be surprised by clothes as being something that pollutes their body, but there's all sorts of things in them, just the dyes and the plasticizers that are in clothes, the synthetic fibers, some of it may be with GM cotton, and so even just wearing the clothes you wear. And we notice, I don't know whether it's happening in the States, but over here it's very difficult to even buy a pair of socks that has not got some bio something, kills bacteria or something.
Oh my gosh.
Something. And you think, crikey, there's no escape from it.
I'll tell you, David, clothing is something that you're absolutely right. You don't hear much about, but I've definitely talked about it. And, for my family and myself, we have switched over to only natural fiber clothing and preferably organic. So, but socks is one of the easiest, the most difficult thing to find without synthetic fibers. And I did find one brand that has 98% organic cotton and 2% elastane. And that's the absolute best that I was able to find. And I bought like 15 pairs.
Stockpiling. Yes.
I don't know if it might not be available in the future, but yeah, the synthetic fibers in clothing, which are all the rage. I mean, if you go into a store at the mall or the shopping center, it's hard to find clothing that is 100% cotton or 100% wool, and everything has plastics in it, plastic fibers, and those all leach chemicals of various types. And there are articles you can find that describe this in more detail, but a lot of these are endocrine disruptors, and they especially affect our sex hormones. So this is definitely a big thing. And of course, among all the chemical exposures that you mentioned, many of them are cancer-inducing or carcinogenic.
Yeah, sure.
Among other things. But when the establishment talks about nutrition, they don't talk at all about the chemicals in the food supply. And, the business model of a grocery store, the way that they are set up is around the perimeter of the store, you have all of the fresh whole foods. So, you have all the meats, you have all of the fresh vegetables and fruits. And then in the interior of the store, it's all processed food. And they make all of their profit from the interior of the store, the processed food. And that's the food business. And that's all the food that is riddled with various types of chemicals. And I wanted to give an example because in your the part of the chapter where you talk about autoimmunity, you had mentioned hydrocarbons as a potential cause, and that there are some scientific studies. And hydrocarbons are basically chemicals derived from petroleum. They're organic solvents mostly. And there are several products on the market, especially in vegan products, that use hydrocarbon solvents like hexane to actually manufacture fake meats and products like tofu. Seitan and these kind of fake meat or meat substitute products that vegans eat as a protein source. And these are among some of the most unhealthy and toxic foods out there. And it's really fascinating that the marketing is couched as, veganism is a healthier way to live, and you should have these processed foods to be a healthy vegan. And it's the opposite of what's true.
I mean, it's a very important point, and it's something that's worried us for exactly those reasons. And of course, one of the clues was when veganism started fairly recently to become really big, and then you saw that people like Bill Gates were involved in it, then you automatically think there's a problem here. He's not exactly an altruistic guy. So, there's a problem. And I think it's a worrying factor because that things can be advertised as vegan, which they are. They're not from animal products, but because they're a processed food, you can be far worse off. So you do, again, have to be very careful. Again, back to what I said, go for natural food. It's packaged very well by nature, so you've got to stay away from processed food. Even if it says vegan on it, you need to stay away from it.
Right. Well, I usually advise people, if you're going to buy food that's in a manufactured package, that it should only have one ingredient, like dried kidney beans, for example, right? Or brown rice, or quinoa, or millet, or sorghum, or any of those good whole grains.
Yeah. Yes. So, it's a minefield just buying good food. But, I think once people have sort of are aware of these traps, if you like, they can avoid them and not just go by the way it's been marketed. And veganism is a prime example of how the marketing has deceived people into thinking that eating healthily, even meat eaters have gone to, if I have sort of 50% of my diet it's vegan, when they don't realise they're still poisoning themselves with what's in it, Absolutely.
Dawn, what were you about to say?
Well, another.
Yes, no. I was just going to say, going back to endocrine, the whole endocrine system, and the impact of hydrocarbons. Dr. Theo Colburn, who I think she died a few years ago, she was. They'd written a book back in, I can't remember exactly when it was, called Our Stolen Future, where they were talking about showing just how many endocrine disrupting chemicals there were, and they were increasing, and the the serious problems that they were causing for people for, in the reproductive system. And that's why there are all sorts of people, and I'm sure that's part of why people are having more and more difficulties having children naturally, first time round, having to go for treatments. But also she connected that to the gas and oil industry and all the toxic chemicals that are used, especially in fracking. And so, they were sort of all brought together, but certainly her particular area of expertise was the endocrine system. And she showed that it was only very, very recently that they started testing any chemicals for any kind of effects on the endocrine system. But the endocrine system is what affects the original sort of development, growth. That's where all new life starts. And so if that's affected, that can really cause incredible disruption. And for unborn children, obviously, that's where you get birth defects. That's one of the sort of main areas that the endocrine system affects, and that isn't always obvious until babies are born. So it's a big thing, and the fact that so few chemicals have been tested only until fairly recently for effects.
And of course, one of the problems is, which we do point out in the book, is a lot of the safety standards are based on the quantity of the dose. They still believe that the dose is the main factor. So the more of it, the more poisonous it is, the less of it. So they develop what they think is a safe level, of a toxin, basically. Well, if it's below this level, then it's not going to affect the body, which is nonsense. I think it's the Paracelsus principle, isn't it? The problem is in the dose. Well, it's not. A poison is a poison. So all you're doing is saying, well, I'm going to have a little less of this poison. But if people think of them as poisons, there's no safe level of a poison. It's going to have an effect. It may not be as noticeable, but it will have an effect, and it'll be a detrimental effect. And particularly with the endocrine system, as you know, the hormone releases are tiny, tiny amounts. There was some figures that I looked at, which I'm not going to try and remember, but there's such tiny amounts that it doesn't require much of some of these toxic chemicals to completely disrupt the hormone excretions from these ductless glands, which is the endocrine system. It doesn't take very much at all. So this Paracelsus principle of, the dose is the important thing. No, if it's a poison, it's a poison, and you shouldn't be taking it into your body. There is no safe level. It will have a detrimental effect. You just may not see it straight away.
Right. Well, sorry, if I may, I wanted to mention, because this applies to pharmaceuticals as well, because, pharmaceuticals are generally poisons, and in order to determine, what they say is a safe dose, what they do these assays usually with animals, where they give different doses to the animals, and then they see what dose do 50% of the animals die. Right, and they call that the LD50, lethal dose 50%. And so they only calculate that. So let's say that we have, drug X, and we say that at 100 milligrams, 50% of the animals die. Okay, so we'll just say, we'll give 10 milligrams, right? But they don't go and look at what is the LD0. Like, what is the lowest dose that no animals die? And wouldn't that be the safe dose? Instead, we're just guessing somewhere below 50. So that means some people are going to die, most likely, not zero, and just an unknown percentage. And we consider that, to be a reasonable thing, or at least the FDA does, in terms of their toxicity standards. And this is why we have, a minimum of 128,000 people in the United States dying a year from prescription drugs. And that's when they're taken as directed. So not misused, no mistakes, as directed, because of this toxicity. And I want to give also one example of an endocrine disrupting drug that has been studied, because you mentioned, that there are not many studies on some of these things, but even if there are compelling studies, it doesn't necessarily lead to any change in policy. And the example I want to mention is atrazine. which is I believe it's a pesticide used in agriculture. And it has been clearly demonstrated by a researcher, I think at Berkeley in California, or it could be Stanford, that it is a major sex hormone disruptor. And in experiments with amphibians like frogs exposed to even small amounts of atrazine, they had disturbed genitalia in the offsprings, like hermaphroditism, where the frogs had both male and female genitalia. And so you can imagine that this could have major effects on development and on things related to sexuality, like fertility, as you mentioned. And so this data was presented to the Environmental Protection Agency, and the EPA said that there wasn't enough evidence of harm to even regulate the substance at all. So they didn't even determine a safe level, if there is such a thing, as you point out, David. So, it's like we really, the only way that we can protect ourselves against these things is to become knowledgeable about it, by like reading your book, for example, and then by paying very close attention to how we get our food. I feel the most secure buying food from local food growers who I have a relationship with, and I talk to them about their practice. And if I ask them, hey, can I come out and visit your farm or your ranch? And they say, yeah, sure. They'll show me what's going on there. I mean, I don't want to disrupt their workday too much, but I would offer to lend a hand, perhaps. But that kind of relationship with people that you have and you build trust, then there's a cost. If they want to take a shortcut and use some chemical to increase their yield, they know that it's disrupting the relationship, and there's a cost to it. And certainly, the way that you can mostly guarantee safe food is actually to grow your own food. Mm-hmm. Although you're still not 100% safe, because, like you said, that there's, in the wind, right? Yeah. There may be glyphosate and other chemicals.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is a minefield, literally. But we have to do something, and as they say, the truth will set you free. The more people know, the more they can do to sort of protect themselves from these things, and certainly not believe anything the establishment puts out. That's probably your first rule of thumb: is don't believe what the establishment tells you. Choose where it's coming from, whether it's governments or the medical establishment. You have to really look deeper.
Right. And let me just compliment you too, because you are just an amazing example of, private people who noticed that something wasn't right, and you said, I'm gonna learn about that, even though I may not be a biologist or a physician. I can spend the time doing research and come to a very deep understanding of what's going on through that kind of effort, of sort of an autodidactic path. Mm-hmm. And I want to encourage people that, we can all do this. Yes. And, there may be some limitations in certain areas, like if I get into biophysics, it's very challenging for me, but that doesn't mean I don't try anyway. But just because, you don't have a certain credential or training doesn't mean you can't learn how to figure out what's going on. And that's really, really important, because, we all have a burden to learn about what's going on around us so that we can make informed decisions. And in order to do that properly, we have to actually learn ourselves. We have to find our own sources of information, and we have to discern how reliable those sources are when we take that information into account. It's really, really important. Yeah, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about inflammation, because this is an area that it's one of those things that's kind of hard to overcome our previous thoughts about it. Like, we may be open to looking at toxins as a cause of disease, and maybe we even question germ theory. But inflammation seems to be one of those things that it's so ingrained in us that it maybe is the cause of disease, and we have all these pharmaceuticals and natural supplements that are anti-inflammatory, right? Like curcumin, for example. I know a lot of people that work with me are taking that. So why don't you tell us what really inflammation is and how we should look at this scientifically?
Okay. Well, inflammation, again, is a natural process of the body. It's an increase in blood supply to a particular injured part. So it's a natural process and not something to be inhibited or to worry about. It's a natural process. So, you shouldn't need to, well, you shouldn't do it actually. If you've got an injury and it becomes red or even swollen around it, it may even immobilize the joint. Let's say you'd fallen and cracked your knee or something like that, and you get inflammation, so it goes red, it may stiffen up, so you can't move it very much. These are natural processes of the body healing itself. It's trying to restrict the movement while the knee heals. It's increased the blood supply, hence so-called inflammation. But this is not a bad thing. It's only if it went on for a long time, which means the healing process is not working, that you might need to do something else about it. But certainly in the initial stages, inflammation is a natural thing. It's the body doing its job to, as I say, either immobilize and increase the blood supply so that healing can take place. That's the short answer.
Right. Well, there is this, but there is this common perception, and it's been, stated by the medical establishment that inflammation is actually like a cause of disease, right? Inflammatory disease. And actually, it's a response to a disease or injury, right?
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Just so because it's found association, it's another one of those correlation equals causation, but of course it's not. It's seen as the wrong way around. It's a result of an injury, but it's part of the body's process, as David said, of healing itself. So you don't want to take something.
Inhibit it. You don't inhibit it doing.
And you certainly don't want to take toxic chemicals that'll disrupt other parts of your body and make it even worse and slow down the healing process.
Right. And, it's so interesting that this causation and association, or correlation and causation, because in my medical education, and especially in my research activities, it's always very strongly emphasized. Correlation does not equal causation, over and over again, right? And the whole randomized placebo-controlled trial is built around a way to differentiate between causation and correlation. Yet, so many of these medical paradigms that are stated over and over again are actually only on the basis of correlation or association, right?
Exactly.
Even with the COVID virus, as I showed, the authors of the papers even concluded an association, right? Not causation. But yet we keep making this mistake over and over again. And so I think this is a really good indicator, if you're the researcher doing your own homework and looking into these things yourself. That's one big red flag. If you see that they're saying that correlation is the evidence of causation, you should right there on the spot question that big time. And what you might actually find is that the opposite is true, just like in this case, that inflammation is something that can help us heal. And it might become prolonged, but that's only because there's something blocking the completion of the healing, right? And the other aspect of it is to confuse the symptoms with the cause of disease, because just like with bacteria, inflammation does cause the symptoms, right? Because when you have that increased blood supply, then you have increased the pressure in that tissue because there's more fluid there, and that aggravates the sensory nerves that give a pain signal or a discomfort signal, right? So that's what you're experiencing, but that's just a consequence of healing, and it's not something to be suppressed. Absolutely.
No, the pain signal is to tell the body to stop moving that particular part and to rest it and let the body actually heal it. But we're so used to, we'll just take a painkiller and carry on living and carry on doing and whatever it is, because that's what you're supposed to do. It's just completely wrong. It's denying the body from doing what it actually is best at, which is healing itself. You don't need, and certainly even if you take pain relief, sometimes injuries are extremely painful, and I'd hate to think people in like serious pain, and obviously there are certain ways of relieving that pain and just taking it to a level that you can cope with, because there are some pains that are excruciating, and I'm sure like an injury, I know kidney stones are pretty painful as well, I understand. So, there are certain things where there is pain relief required, but not
for a short period of time.
Period of time,
and till you can get to a position where then the body takes over. You've got from sort of excruciating pain to sort of manageable pain.
But in those situations where there is acute pain, it doesn't mean you have to go and get some morphine, because there are many other ways to relieve that pain, including actually just drinking extra water, often by itself is enough to reduce the pain to a tolerable level. And you can do things like applying ice, which will help numb the area and reduce pain. There's many things you could do. Castor oil packs, which help detoxify the area, because like with chronic pain. So like I have a lot of experience with injured workers, and it's a typical story that they're leading a very toxic lifestyle, as most people are, and they get a physical injury, and they're probably also malnourished in the right constituents to repair the injury. So what happens is that they don't fully heal from the injury, and the immune system deposits some of those toxin materials right at the site of the injury, and that provides a lot of irritation to the sensory nerves, and you get this kind of chronic pain situation that never heals properly. And the medical industry just basically throws all kinds of medications at that. And when they use opioid pain medications, they actually end up compounding the problem, because that causes constipation, which means that the body has to hold on to more toxins, right? And then they're going to put them right in that injury site as well, because now it's a designated, storage area. So it's really a vicious cycle. And then you go back to the doctor, you get more medications at higher doses, and it never ends. And I see these people sometimes years later, and they're just miserable, completely miserable from this process.
Yeah, and on lots and lots of different medications for the side effects of the first medication, and like you say, it's a whole vicious cycle for because they think that all these other symptoms are some other condition, instead of realising that it's the body really trying hard to heal itself, and it's just not being allowed to, because more and more toxins are coming in, and if, as you say, many cause constipation. I think painkillers. If the body's not releasing the toxins, it's not a good situation, to put it mildly.
So, Dawn and David, I think we have time to cover one more topic today. Is there something that is pressing for you, or would you like me to designate a subject?
Well, I think we'd just like to mention, because we've talked about, we've used the term autoimmune diseases, because this is a great subject that the medical establishment used to blame a lot of things on, where it means that the body's attacking itself, which is, when you look into the evidence, is complete nonsense. The body's quite smart, actually, and doesn't attack itself at all. And there's no, and we've looked at a lot of this, there's no scientific proof to say that the body attacks itself. It can be poisoned, it can have all sorts of things done to it, but it doesn't attack itself. So it's a bit of a misnomer, really.
Well, David, there's another important aspect to that. I mean, I completely agree with you, right? Because our bodies have so much wisdom and complexity to do all these things right. But also, many of these autoimmune diseases never existed before the last 50 or 75 years. Yeah. So did our bodies suddenly change and start attacking itself just recently out of the blue, by random chance?
Yeah, it suddenly became stupid. After thousands and thousands of years, it forgot what it was supposed to do.
Well, it does suit the medical establishment to make people think that there's nothing that they can do for their own health. They're not responsible, they're not in control, their body's stupid, it's just a machine, and all you have to do is take these bits and take these medicines, vaccines, whatever it is, and they'll fix whatever is ailing the body. It's very machine-like idea, and the body is definitely not a machine. It's, as you say, far more wisdom, far more complexity, and certainly capable of looking after itself. But you've got to be able to give it the support, and so, nutritional intakes, but also reducing exposures to as many toxins as possible. So people do need to know that where the toxins are so that they can reduce their exposures, and that includes the medications they're given for supposedly sort of helping them restore their health.
I mean, from what we can see with any of the classification of autoimmune diseases, they are nearly always toxic based. The actual cause of them is a group of toxins. And I'm thinking one of the major ones, of like multiple sclerosis, where the myelin sheath of the nerves gets damaged. And, there's quite a bit of information that shows various chemicals that can do that. And I think aspartame is one of them, which is something that is in most
That's NutraSweet, right?
Yeah. So, people can be taking that. I mean, I think it's Dr. Blaylock had said, that should never have been allowed. If it had been investigated properly, it would have been banned. It should never have been allowed onto the market. And yet it's in so many soft drinks, and people are drinking this toxic thing.
It's the sugar thing, isn't it? Reduce your sugar intake, or take these sugar-free drinks, which are certainly sweet, but they're the chemicals they're made with are I don't know if they're worse than sugar, but they're just as bad. Yeah. They're certainly not better for you, and they cause all sorts of problems. I mean, they're really. But again, it goes back to the unnatural ingredients in foods.
I'm not saying that aspartame is the only thing that causes multiple sclerosis, of course. I mean, but it is toxic based and damaging, as I say, the nerve sheaths, and so it's a progressive thing. But it's nothing to do with the body attacking itself. And every one of these so-called immune diseases that we looked into, it was always easy to trace back to toxemia of one sort or another, which was at the base of it. Certainly not the body attacking itself.
Right. David, what is their evidence to say that the body is attacking itself, or what do they say is the cause of? I mean, I know they say overall they don't know what causes autoimmune disease, right? But do they have any evidence at all to back up any of their claims?
Well, no. I mean, they don't. And this is, on the face of it, it looks like, as they usually are, it looks like, because it's a man in a white coat saying something, so it's obviously authoritative and everyone will believe it. But when you look at their own evidence, there is nothing, and they even admit, they'll use the words, "this is poorly understood." That's a phrase that we come across in the official papers time and time again. They'll start off talking as if it sounds like they know what they're talking about, and then right at the end they'll say, "but this is poorly understood." The mechanisms for this are poorly understood, which means they don't actually know. So no, they don't have any evidence to say the body attacks itself. Definitely not. But there's plenty of evidence to show how toxic chemicals attack the body and the damage that it causes. There's plenty of evidence of that.
What about these so-called autoantibodies, like that we make antibodies that react against our own tissues? Have you looked into that?
Well, we've come across it, but to be honest, I think that's a whole new tin of worms, if I can use that phrase, of what are antibodies really? Are they really understood? And certainly from what we've seen, they're not. They're not really understood. And I think it's another one of these, we don't really understand it, but we'll invent a new term and make it look like we do understand it. And maybe I'm being a little cruel, but that seems to be what happens,
It's an extension of the germ theory, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
The whole idea that the body's got to produce something to defend itself against the attacking something or other, whether it's an antigen, allergen, virus, bacterium, whatever it is. So the body's producing something to attack. It's just the warfare model, which we've found does not apply in terms of disease. So it's just another way of when something happens in the body, or well, if it's if there isn't a so-called germ or something else, it's got to be another something. They've got to give it another name, and so it's we look at it autoantibodies in that kind of way.
It's almost smoke and mirrors, if I can use that phrase.
Right. The term antibody, right, means against the body. So, and I think that most people have the perception that antibodies actually destroy germs, but that even if you look in an immunology textbook, that's not the case at all. So I think actually the main role of antibodies, and I want to say that antibodies are not nearly as specific as people think, right? People think that an antibody only reacts with one molecule, but that's not true. There's a substantial cross-reactivity. But what antibodies, one function that I think is real is that they actually just find foreign substances that may be in our body from a variety of sources, right? Like most simply, when you get a cut, then foreign things come into your body. When you eat food, foreign things come into your body, right? So it's happening on a routine basis. When you breathe the air, foreign things are coming in. And antibodies may be able to bind to some of these foreign things and then bring them to our lymph nodes where they could be recognized. And then maybe there's some kind of decision that occurs, is this something that's harmful or not? And if it's harmful, maybe then there's a response to it. But the antibody itself, doesn't do anything more. It just binds something and then it just floats around until there's another cell that has a receptor that can take the antibody and then do something with it, right?
Is this antibody, this name, just another name for something else? I'm tempted, particularly with your work on exosomes. Could exosomes be doing the same job? Scooping up these toxic things that are in the body, scooping it up and getting rid of it?
Well, I think actually the way it might work is because antibody is a protein, right? It's not more complex than that. It's just one molecule. It's a big molecule with complexity, but it's one molecule. And I think it may actually interact with the exosome system, because if the antibody binds something, and then one side of the antibody, it binds foreign substances. They call that the variable region, and that's why you can have different antibodies that bind different things, because the sequence of that variable region changes. But on the other side, and antibodies are kind of shaped like a Y, and it's the two little arms that have the variable region at the end, and the stem of the Y on the bottom has something called the constant region, or the FC. And that is common to all antibodies. And so the cells that the antibody can interact with, they have a receptor for that constant region, so that they can take up the antibody and then see what's attached to it to sort of see what to do. And then those cells may create exosomes in response to that, which may serve as signaling properties to give communication to other parts of the body, and then also may actually gobble up toxic materials if there are any recognized to be present. And exosomes have also been found to interact with the immune system by having what's known as MHC receptors on them. And that's the same, it's called major histocompatibility complex. It's what's used to match a donor for an organ transplant. So, I think that, the whole immune system issue, right, it's definitely sold to us in this warfare paradigm, along with germ theory, that it's just to fight invaders. But it's really much more of a surveillance, communication, and logistics system. It finds out what's going on, and it undergoes operations to, if there's a problem, to contain it or to manage it, and it's directing different functions to go on here, based on the body's physiologic needs. But it's not, a militarized organ.
Well, we don't even. And we do talk about the immune system, and we don't even like to use that term, because I think it's a bit of a misnomer, because vaccinations, of course, are based on the fact that, or supposed fact, that the body has this immune system which can be sort of boosted up in some way by vaccinations. And the body doesn't work that way. The body has what we like to call a health system. Yes, it's got various things for removing toxins or even parasites if some enter the body, with nitric oxide and things like that. So it's got lots of things that it can use. But it's the normal body functioning. There's nothing you can do to the body, certainly not through a vaccination, which boosts it up, because the medical establishment talks about, boosting your immune system. But it's, again, I say it's a misnomer. There isn't really an immune system you can boost up. The only thing you can do is have a healthy body so that it functions properly. And that's the best thing to do and the only thing you can do.
David, I am so glad to hear you say that. I mean, because so many times people, how can I boost my immune system? I like in German New Medicine, which is not something I've studied extensively. I'm just kind of getting an introduction to it. But they talk about, relabel the immune system as support system. And if you just call it the support system, then, you have a much more accurate representation of what it is. But yeah, like vitamin C is an example of this where, and vitamin C can be very effective for a variety of conditions. Like, I'm not saying that it's not a good supplement to take, right? But many times people say that, vitamin C works by boosting up your immune system. And that's simply not the way it works. The way it works is it's a very potent antioxidant. Sure. And so it helps quelch and manage those free radical chain reactions we were talking about before. And you could see that if you think it boosts your immune system, then you're operating in the germ theory warfare way of thinking, without realizing that it's actually involved in detoxification.
Sure, because it's one of those strange things, just as an aside to that, is that the human body doesn't manufacture its own vitamin C. Most animals do, but the human body doesn't, so it does need to take in vitamin C, but it doesn't need huge amounts of it. People think, I'm going to have to eat 5 oranges a day or something like that. It's obviously that would be totally impractical, and the body couldn't function that way. So you only need a small amount, but you do need vitamin C, and we do have to take it in. Quite why the body was designed that way, when all other animals make their own vitamin C, I'm not quite sure. But obviously there's some purpose to it. But that's just a fact. That's how we're designed.
The thing is with food, people say, there's only 30 milligrams of vitamin C in an orange. That's not enough. But it goes back to, again, what we were saying, we were talking about much earlier. The food is packaged with so many other elements, components, whatever it is, that they interact synergistically. I'm sure they do, to make that 30 milligrams be as effective as
necessary,
as it needs to be.
Right.
And far more effective than taking vitamin C on its own, because you need all those other elements to sort of function together. I mean, it's in the same way that you need magnesium in the body to be able to absorb calcium into the bones. So there's no point in taking lots and lots of calcium. Well, not only that, it can be dangerous, but you need the right level of magnesium to absorb it into the bone. So it's with everything else. It's not just the single vitamin, which we're saying before, not to concentrate on just one vitamin or one aspect of the diet. It's if you eat the food, there's a whole complex of nutrients within it. I mean, I can't think of any other way. I mean, it's not just vitamins and minerals, but everything that helps, again, amino acids, everything that the body needs and will absorb and assimilate. Yes, and assimilate and use, and you get much higher nutrient level, and it's actually much better to have an orange, and not worry about the whatever it is, small amount of vitamin C, because there's so much more in it. It's complex, and it's so much more.
Right. Well, this whole idea about separating out an individual component from a plant is really the business model of the pharmaceutical industry, because if they purify a single compound and then are able to make it synthetically in a factory, they can get a patent on it and they can have a much, much higher profit margin. But over and over again, it's clearly been demonstrated that it's the combination of all of the different constituents of a plant that is medicinal. And, I think, we may not want to talk a lot about cannabis, but it's a great example of that. When you purify out just the CBD oil, for example, you're actually losing the terpenes and the cannabinoids. And we're talking about dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of compounds. And it's really when the plant as a whole is together that the maximum benefit of all those synergistic interactions. And, almost every thing I recommend is like that. And, the molasses is a good example because it has both magnesium and calcium. And also potassium and phosphorus, so that it will support that balance because those complementary minerals are present in the same food, so it can aid our physiology. And then the last point I just want to reiterate that you made earlier, Dawn, because this is really a central issue, is that many of much of what we're told about the cause of disease are things that are beyond our control, that we are sitting here as helpless individuals against, the onslaught of disease-causing agents of a variety. And of course, if we can't do anything about it, it's just bad luck or random chance or, the evil out there, then we have to rely on other people to manage it for us. We have to rely on the healthcare system, where if we acknowledge the principle of cause and effect and realize that actually we are causing these illnesses in ourselves, perhaps without knowing that we're doing it, but we can learn. And then if we can learn, we can stop putting the toxins in our body, we can improve our nutrition, we can deal with psychological stress, we can mitigate electromagnetic field exposure, and we can restore ourselves to health. And that may be much less profitable, but it will result in far greater health and prosperity for all of us.
Absolutely that. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, it's just, that's the kind of core message of the book, really.
And it gives people freedom. It gives them freedom, and that's very important to us, I'm sure, to yourself as well. And I know because you've spoken recently to Derek Brose, I know that's very important to him too. So that's a particular message that we hope that our book will help put across, that people can gain freedom from it, as well as understanding about their bodies and understanding about what natural health truly is, and it gives them freedom from the establishment.
Especially at the moment with what's going on. That's so important that people just don't get caught up in this whole fear thing.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I want to thank you. It's been a real treat to have you guys back. It's we could go on for hours, I'm sure, but I want to make this manageable for the viewers, and then also give an opportunity to come back another time and continue this series. Okay. So will you tell the viewers, remind them again where they can find your work and where they can find your book?
Sure. Well, we do have a little website, so which people can go to, which is exactly the main title, whatreallymakesyouill.com. So you can go there and find out. We slowly put in more information up there of various chats like this that we've had with various people around the world. And they can get a bit more information there and listen to us talk if they wish to. And there's also an email address there, which if they want to email us if there's something they don't understand in the book, I hasten to add again, as I always do, we're not there to give medical advice, but if there's something they didn't understand in the book, then we can hopefully explain that to them. But we do get people writing to us and saying, do you do this book in Estonian or all sorts of stuff? Yeah, seriously, we get this. Russian we've had, and all sorts. But
has it been translated at all yet?
No.
Right. I think it would be quite an undertaking.
Yes.
It would. Can I just add, we have started writing some articles, so that's another little part of the website. We're just adding different. Adding some extra information. Well, not extra, but information about certain topics. I don't think we're planning to make it necessarily a kind of regular.
We're not serialising the book.
Oh no. but just certain.
You say that now.
Yeah. Well, the first article is about the germ theory, because that's obviously so pertinent at the moment, and again, it's just, a little sort of, say little, I mean, it's an article, it's the first one, so hopefully there'll be a few more.
So we keep appearing on various places. People are approaching us now, which is great, and we've had very good reception for the book. As I say, it's exceeded even our expectations, and it's just gone crazy. So
and we really appreciate the support, because it helps us carry on doing this research.
It's well deserved. I mean, your book is extremely well researched and presented in a way that's easy to understand, and it's really a comprehensive source. And so you can really rely on it for so much. So I really appreciate you guys being here. Let me remind everyone to please check out my website at andrewkaufmanmd.com. I do offer natural healing consultations and available for interviews, and there's much more on the website. Please sign up for my newsletter as well, which will be coming out soon. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I want to keep bringing you more informative interviews and other material like this, and I'd really appreciate if you would be on my list so that you could be notified about what's going on. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.